to the West End Video Newsletter. My name is Joe Piccolo, your host for this week's newsletter. Today we have a real special show. Our guest is going to be, we have a short film with Leonard Nimoy, who made a recent visit to Boston, and he was gracious enough to, where he does originate from the West End, his boyhood days, he was gracious enough to give us some time for a short interview, so stay tuned because we'll be going to that shortly. Our first guest today is Paul Mondello, representing his dad, who was a famous West Ender, Mr. Anthony Mondello, and our second guest is Mr. Ben Brenner of the famous Brenner Brothers and the Brenner Club from the West End. And we have a real interesting show, so stay tuned, and we'll start with Paul. Paul, you're here today representing your dad.
Yes.
What role did he play in the West End?
Well, basically, I mean, being born and brought up in the West End and being a very tight community back in those days, they sought their friendship out over a period of years. And back in the early 50s, A and B got together and decided that maybe they should have a get-together. And we have a picture here of three of the founders of this group. To your left, Mr. Charles Doherty, my dad.
What was the group called?
The Old Time West Enders.
And when did that start? What year?
1950. The idea started around 1950-51, and the first get-together was 1952. And to the right is James Clark.
And what was his...
Basically, they were the group that stimulated this entire operation to get off the ground, and from them it grew to 300-400 members.
Wow. And who's in the middle?
That's my dad.
Okay.
Anthony Mondello.
And on the...
The right is James Clark.
Okay. And they started this group?
Yes, they did.
And went to 300 members?
Yes.
Wow. And what was their function?
Basically, it was just to get together once a year to trade stories, memories, successes, whatever.
Here's another, this is, we could show this on the air.
This is one of the programs of one of the get-togethers back in 1957. And inside it would list the organizing committee, prominent speakers, basically a little background on the major speaker. They also had a takeoff on This Is Your Life.
Oh, really?
And it was a surprise for somebody that would be present, and they just present a portfolio of pictures and information on a normally successful West Ender, of which there's some information here in the materials I've brought today.
Now, as growing up, you used to attend these meetings with your dad, huh?
It was unavoidable. I mean, I was in his back pocket, and for one week meeting, these gentlemen would get together 9 months of the year, obviously just to get together for the sake of getting together, to plan the big event, which usually was held the first month of every year.
And it's sort of a testimonial also?
Yes, it was a testimonial for an outstanding West Ender of achievement, whether he be in industry or...
Do you recall some of the names?
Sure. There was Samuel Tomasello, who was a contractor. I believe there was Mark Bortman, who was pretty involved in international trade back in the late 40s and 50s. John Shelburne, who was an outstanding football player up at Dartmouth back in the 20s or 30s. Forgive me on dates because, I mean, this is before my time, Joe.
Well, you're doing well.
Thank you.
And your dad, he arranged the speakers and so forth?
Well, there were different people. Obviously, to make any kind of an organization grow, you'd want to have more participation. And people were eager to take assignments over the years.
And they come up with a West End logo for this organization.
Yeah.
Maybe we could get a shot of this. Can you explain the logo? Or?
Well, I guess it's good times. It's a bunch of hot tickets that wanted to get together, and believe me, there's nothing serious about it. Good health, good cheers. It's just a few cartoons about what they did as kids, as any kids would do in any day and age, even today.
And here's some golden rules of all West Enders. Maybe you could read a few of those for us.
Well, it might be interesting.
Yeah.
The golden rule of the old West Enders. An example of a tenet common to all great faiths is the golden rule. Below are quotations from leading religions, and it goes, Christianity. All things whosoever ye would that men should do to you, do you even unto them. Judaism. Whatsoever you do not wish your neighbor to do to you, do not unto him. Confucianism. What you do not want done to yourself, do not undo to others. In Islam, no one of you is a believer until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. And I guess this might sum up the theme of what they were doing. They really wanted to get together. There was no business conducted or who does what, or you didn't have to show your 1099 or W-2 form at 1040 at the end of the year. This was just people wanting to be people. It didn't make any difference what your status in life was. They just loved one another, and they helped one another also.
That's the great thing about the West End. It was people helping people and people loving people, and no matter where you go today and you meet a West Ender, your eyes light up because that's the way it was. And I've never seen anything like this. It's sort of a phenomenon. And people, they say West Enders, they know each other. They really get together and love each other. It's just unbelievable. Here's another clip we could show. This was another get-together they had.
54.
1954. There's a little cartoon there. And these are all great items you saved here from your dad's collection.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And also, we want to mention that your dad also put out a newsletter in those days, and was called the West End Bugle.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember what year that started?
I believe that's the first, 1952.
1952. And we could get a shot of this, the West End Bugle. So that's quite. Okay, let's see it there. And he was he the editor of this newsletter?
He primarily was the instigator to get this newsletter out, and initially I believe he wrote that, and in subsequent years they had participation by other members of the West End Old Timers Association.
Okay.
As you can see, they have very critical weather reporting up in the upper right-hand corner.
Maybe you can read it for us.
Which is the tenor of probably the whole group. The weather forecast for West End and vicinity. Fair and cooler Wednesday to be followed by Thursday and Friday. I mean, and this was Johnny Chincholo. I remember said that this probably is the greatest literary achievement of his life, but that was it.
Can you read some of the inside of that, some of the names, or
surely
some of the names of the different?
Well, I hate to take the scene here today, but this is me as a boy.
Okay, so hold that up.
Behind your finger.
Okay. Can you get that? Okay, here we go.
Yeah, my younger brother.
Okay, what year was that taken?
That has to be 1952.
Okay. And here's another newsletter. Let's see, maybe we could mention some of the articles in there.
Oh, let's see. There's an article here in the St. Joseph Society, and featuring an attraction that they had back in 1982, which was reprinted from an editorial submitted by Jack Burns of the Boston Globe.
Jack Burns, right.
West End House. And it was basically clips and statements from different people that contributed.
And here's one honoring Admiral Morrison. Do you recall that?
Right. He was the Navy's historian, official historian for many years, and one of his most famous books was a book on Christopher Columbus. The name escapes me. Admiral of the Ocean Seas. Being born in Beacon Hill and being very attentive to the West End Association, I guess you might call him an associate West Ender, being on the wrong side of the hill. But he was featured in this guest meeting, and there's reference here to a Colonel Sam Tomasello, also, who was a very prominent businessman and contractor, and very philanthropic in his ways to West Enders and non-West Enders.
What's some of your father's real close buddies in the West End? Do you recall any of the names?
Well, initially it was this Charles Doherty, and I'd say there was a Charles Rennig, and there was Maxwell Shapiro of Maxwell Shapiro Wooling Company, and Mark Bortman, who was also very active and supported it financially for many, many years to get it off the ground. The name goes on, fellows by the name of Moish Bernstein.
He was a pretty prominent West Ender.
He was just a wonderful human being.
And did your dad did he belong to any of the clubs in the West End, the West End House or the Peabody House? Or
I believe he did. I believe he did. But this is where his heart was.
And for how many years did he do this after the West End?
Well, starting in 1950-51 until his death in 1969, and I believe it continued until 1973-1974, at which time Charlie Rennig from, I believe, Brighton picked the ball up with Maxwell Shapiro's financial support to see these dinners come to fruition on an annual basis.
And your dad was a printer? He printed these?
Yes, he did.
Where's the shop located?
At that particular time, it was where the current Boston City Hall is located, in Adams Square in Boston.
What was it called? What was it?
Bowden Print, named after Bowden Square in Boston. What else?
Okay, and you had quite a clientele there, huh? From a lot of former West Enders.
Absolutely.
Okay, and here's one here of Cardinal. Is that?
That's Cardinal Cushing.
Can we show Cardinal Cushing?
Yes.
What year was that?
This is in 1956.
Okay, we'll show. Get a shot of that, if we can. Can we get a shot of Cardinal Cushing here? Or? Oh, there he is. Okay, right there. Cardinal Cushing, 1950.
Cardinal Cushing.
And who's with him?
On the left is Mark Bortman, who was very involved in international trade. In the middle is the mayor of Rome, who back at that time, evidently there was a high-key interest in Rome, and Mr. Bortman brought him here to Boston. They had a Rome-Boston celebration, and he was responsible for that particular event. So that gained prominence.
Do you recall any of the political aspects of those days? Would they honor any of the politicians from the West End in those days?
If they did, it wasn't the focus. If by accident or by default somebody of prominence happened to be a politician, so be it. But they did not focus on anybody's office. It was basically how they treated other people and worked within the group. And I don't think you would expect of anybody today.
Okay, you just had a pretty exciting happening.
Yes, I did.
You could tell us about outside of the West End.
Well, only because this is part of the West End. This particular book right here is the Russian version of the...
Hold it.
Yep.
Can we get a shot of this? Will you explain it to us?
Yes. This particular book is the Russian version of the largest selling children's book in this country, Make Way for Ducklings, which is written by Robert McCloskey. And basically it's the story of ducklings crossing from the Boston Common across Beacon Street years ago. So when Mrs. Gorbachev was here back in 1990 at the Wellesley College commencement in June, Mrs. Bush took it to the Boston Common and she presented the ducklings and said, I wish we had something similar to that in Moscow. And so be it, grant the wish. And sure enough, the ducklings were recreated by the sculptress, and they were presented this past July, coinciding with the summit, and I had coordinated the printing and the presentation for the White House, and only because it's part of the West End did I involve myself. And I had met Mrs. Bush and Mrs. Gorbachev and spoken to them, and they're people.
The West End family does well, huh?
Yes.
It was really great.
They were dying to read about West End Progny. So,
and that was held down at the originally down at the Public Garden.
Yes.
Where most West Enders, when they were kids, used to go skating down at the
Yes.
Public Garden.
Yes.
Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And did your dad speak much about any activities that, like when he was younger, swimming on the Charles River? Or
I think it was more in his day that because of everybody being somewhat impoverished, that he quit grammar school in the 7th grade so that he could go to work to help support the family.
Okay.
And it was more of that vein of thought. He was a self-educated man, very well read, oil paintings, watercolors, musician, family of musicians.
Oh, great. Well, you've been very interesting, and you gave us a good history and a good background of the old West End Bugle, and your dad, who was the founder of this, along with others, and your famous Ducklings here. That's really great, a tribute to the old West End. Thank you. And we're going to be going to a tape now of Leonard Nimoy. See you in a few minutes.
What can I say for you?
Lenny, thank you so much for coming here to the West End.
This is a big treat for me.
Okay, and we'd like to say hi to all the people from the West End.
Hi to all the people from the West End. I think about you all the time. I love to hear about the West End all the time, and I do hope I am going to get around to doing a tape of my memories of the West End, and I'm going to send it to you folks, and I hope you run it on your cable access show.
This has means so much to all the people who used to live in the West End.
I think about it constantly. It was living there was a great beginning for my life, and a great inspiration for me. Wonderful people, wonderful times. I remember it very, very well, and we'll be talking about it more in the near future.
Great. So nice you never forgot your roots. Really,
Not at
really
all.
appreciate
Not
it.
at all.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. What do you got here?
We'd like to present you something from the Peabody House.
The Elizabeth Peabody House is still alive and well. A letter from the director of the theater, a program and some of their informational
Where are
material.
they now?
They're in Somerville, on Broadway
Right.
and Somerville. So the
Right.
theater is still alive and well.
I remember 357 Charles Street.
Right.
And I think about it every time I come in from the airport because we usually pass that way.
Well,
on the way to
this is
town
something
here.
to rekindle those memories.
This is wonderful.
It's an updated schedule, and there's also an article that has you at 21 years old in
yeah.
one of your opening pictures.
This is wonderful. This makes the whole trip
On
to
behalf
Boston
of all of us,
worthwhile.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Move it in.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're back live now. Our second guest is Mr. Ben Brenner from the West End. Ben, you could tell us a little bit about your background from the West End?
Well, I was born on Auburn Street back in 1928. Grew up in the West End. Left the West End in 1958. Well, actually thrown out, I should say. Actually, where I got my, have to say, my greatest love and still love is still the West End house, Joe. And listening to the discussion here, it really brings back something where you mentioned about 5 names, and every name was different. There was a Jew, an Irishman, an Italian, an Ukrainian, and this is one of the things that I still wish that we could still live in, where I don't have this problem of black. I never knew what a black was so on until I moved out of the West End. I got into the service, actually. But my main function, actually, when I want to speak about is how we grew up in the West End. First recollection that I could actually look back into is back at 79 Chambers Street, right across the St. Joseph's Church.
Right.
4-story house, and there was Italians, 2 Italian families and
Do you
1
recall the
Irish.
names?
Spinelli is one of them.
Okay, right.
Because I remember Mrs. Spinelli yelling out, Mrs. Joe Spinelli, and all the other windows used to open up. There were so many Spinellis.
Sure.
Then my next door neighbor was this young little skinny kid called Lenny Nimoy.
Oh,
Yeah, Lenny was there, and what happened there is, up in the corner near the synagogue, there was a cleaner, Syets, and Wynn floor covering. And this is where we hung out. There was about 6 or 7 of us, and in the recent picture you saw a few of us.
mention some of the names, because we always like to hear them.
Bernie Hartfield, Lenny Nimoy, Bert Wynn.
Oh, sure, Bert is a great guy.
Bert, but he left before us. Bert, and Hussy Lack, and a few other girls. And we just hung around the corner doing nothing as usual, running away from Mr. McCarthy, who kept chasing us away.
McCarthy the cop.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Right down the alley to Leverett Street. And one thing about Mr. McCarthy, he could never run too fast. And then all of a sudden we decided, hey, as usual, your whole focus was moving from corner to corner until you hit Feeney's. Then you became a big shot when you finally hit Feeney's. But in between that time was the West End house. This is where you spent most of the time. I was telling Paul here, I'd go home at one time at lunch and find my mother has moved. And she would never tell us. We moved around the West End so fast and furious. But the main place we stood for a few years, Joe, was down at the Chambers Street. I was deathly afraid of Father Powers. When I saw him on this side, I'd go the other side. But this young, scrawny kid, Lenny Nimoy, slick hair, very thin, terrible, terrible athlete. Oh, he was terrible. But he had one ambition, and he said it at 9 years old, Joe. He said, someday I'm going to be an actor. And we all laughed it off. And he kept saying that. He was a big Al Jolson fan because in the cellar, you remember the cellar?
Sure.
He had a big collection. I don't know how he got that collection of the old 78s of Al Jolson. And he'd sit around and say, someday, fellas, I'd be an actor. And we just said, Lenny, get off the pot. We don't know where you're going. While he was going to school, he kept doing different things in the acting field. He went down to the Elizabeth Peabody House. The West End House did not have any acting stage or anything, but at the Elizabeth Peabody House, magnificent facility for stage. The funny part of it, the one play that he was in that we can remember, his brother was the lead.
Oh.
Yeah, most people forget that his brother, Melvin, is a very top executive right now in Johnson & Johnson. That's a great young man. Well, he's not young anymore. But Lenny still had that ambition. Took up fencing. That was his one big sport. And he did very, very nicely in fencing. back in the mind was his acting ability.
Tell us a little, you told me a little story last time I met you, Ben, about the declamation contest he was in,
good.
the West End House.
The West End House.
Right.
As you're growing up in the West End, and we became a group. We became a group called the Braves. We had our purple and gold sweaters and the Braves. Teddy Dubrow, who was one of our leaders down there, asked this group that was hanging around in the corner, he said, why not come into the West End House and form a club and go along and everything else? So we all decided, we paid our dues, went into the West End House. As you're going up the ladder from junior, midget, junior, intermediate to seniors, there are events that are taking place with basketball, Christmas run, walk, and so on and so on. And one outstanding event is called Declamation Contest, which is the old health unit. We used to have, from each club, there were different clubs. There was the Hawks, the Braves, and there was the Tigers and so on, would compete with each other in declamation, which is actually public speaking. Now, Lenny Nimoy, the first year, went in there about age 13, and he got really beat bad by two youngsters called Cyrus Delvecchio and Mike Delvecchio. Now, Lenny at that time had a pretty good speaking voice, nothing outstanding, but he was so intent after that year that he got beat. He ended up, I think, 6th. That he said, I am going to, one thing about Lenny, when he said he was going to do something, he did something. So he said, I'm going to try to beat them. Now, Cyrus and Michael were at Latin school, where they had debating teams, and Cyrus Delvecchio came in 3rd nationally, so you know he's pretty good. Now, all of a sudden, Lenny disappeared in the summer, where we were playing ball, hanging around the corner, whist, and so on. Lenny disappeared. He kept going someplace down over the public garden. We couldn't figure out any reason why. Came September, still didn't show up as active as we thought. As we started to go into our functions, Lenny came out and said, I've been practicing all summer and the first 2 months this speech called A Letter to My Bearer. And when the declamation came in April, I'm glad to say Lenny outperformed Cyrus and Michael. And to this day, he beat him.
Oh, that was
Lenny
great.
did beat Cyrus. And to this day, Cyrus is very irritated with Lenny for beating him at that time. Michael, it doesn't bother, but Cyrus, it did. Then we all got together. I remember him going, he finally said, I'm going to go to California. And we said, why? He says, I'm trying to get into the Pasadena Playhouse. So we had a little party for him. We all raised some money for him. He still owes us $1.50. He hasn't paid us back. We try to collect. With the interest, it's way over. But we knew at that time, by the way, he was a pretty good salesman in vacuum cleaners. I went around with him on vacuum cleaners, and you could all of a sudden see that voice of his starting to come along. He went to school out there, and amazingly, his first 2 movies that he played were in sports. The first movie I remember was a boxer called Kid Montferrone. Please, if any time you see that on television, avoid it. And the other one was with a cat, with Ray Milland, where he was a baseball player. Now, you cannot picture, we can and I can, how bad Lenny was in sports. So we have to still to this day laugh at that. And we lost a little touch with him, but we do. One of the fellows, Sherwin Feinstein, rest his soul, he passed away, but he used to keep in touch with Lenny pretty good, because they used to hook school together pretty good too. But he did say at one time, it's amazing, he said at 9, I am going to be an actor, Joe.
He achieved his goal.
Yeah,
He sure is.
absolutely did.
Tell us, his father had a barber shop called Max's Barber Shop. Do you recall that?
On Leverett Street.
Right.
He was a partner with this other gentleman on Leverett, right across Causeway Street. You had to walk up 4 stairs. To this day, I don't know if Lenny even went to him for a haircut. I'm pretty proud of it. But that's where he was on Leverett Street. Idolized his family.
And that was sort of a gathering place for all West Enders,
Yeah.
the barber shop, I recall.
I'll tell you another thing that most people do not know is that when everybody had to move out of the West End, that Mr. and Mrs. Nimoy moved out to Brighton, Alston, and Brookline, and Lenny would come in once a month, but nobody, even when he was doing everything famous, he would come in and sneak in, go in, visit the family, come right back out. And that's how he was.
Well, I tell you, he's quite a guy, because for him to come into Boston and give us the only 15-minute break he had to remember the West End, we really, really appreciate that. He's quite a guy to remember his roots. Not too many people of his stature would really do that. So that goes to show you what type of West End upbringing he had, and his great parents he had, and so forth and so on. You also had tell us about the Brenner Club from the West End house.
Well, actually, the Brenner Club started off as the Braves. This is the Braves, and my brother, George Brenner, who was a very, very strong West End house advocate. Two things that he would fight strongly at that time was the Boston Red Sox and the West End house. And George passed away in October of '43, and we were the Braves then, so we decided at that time to name it the group after the George Brenner Association, which it is now, and we're still together now after these many years. In fact, right now there's 20 of us getting ready for the anniversary.
And you still have anniversaries each year. You have get-togethers?
Yes. Well, there's been 2 spin-offs there. One of them did not continue, but there's one association. The other spin-off has been getting together every month with the wives, and we've been doing this for 43 years now. We're getting ready for our 45th.
See, that goes to show you the West End has gone over 30 years, and here we have groups of guys still getting together like they did over 30 years ago. That goes to show you the camaraderie there was in the West End, and there still is.
Well, I can say one thing, Joe. The first Brenner Club had rivals, and I'll say this is the Hawk Club. And that's another group that we used to be on Clayman's Corner. We were on this side of Clayman's, and they were on the other side. You don't realize how vicious we were with each other, but now we're together, and we call it the Hawk Brenners.
Well, that's wonderful.
And we've started a scholarship fund for the camp, and we get together every month.
That was one of the great things that you don't see today. The West End, with the youth of the West End, everything was built around sports and debating and organized happenings, and that's what's missing in today. Today there's no organization for kids, no settlement houses to go to. No, that was the focal point in those days, and every corner had its own club, its own name, its own group, and they got together, and their frustrations were taken out with sports, not with drugs and dope and alcohol. It was all sports oriented, and that's what we need today.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if you ever try to explain it to a person that doesn't know the West End. It's very difficult. They just don't know how we went from every month we had something to do, starting in September up until June. Then we went 2 weeks to camp. And you know about camp.
Well, I just come back from camp. It was a great camp. Tell us, can you give us a few, we only have a minute left, can you give us a few names of the guys that still get together in the
Oh, sure. Sonny Kaplan, Frankie Giamato, Siegel, Theron, Stanley Singer, Freddie Lampkin. That's one group. The other group is Paul Senecal, Luca LaCambria, Vincent Russo, George Gilboy, Anthony LaCambria, Minicello.
Oh, that's great. All former West Enders. Yeah. That's wonderful. Well, I appreciate you coming here today. You were a great guest and very interesting, and you gave us an insight of the old West End. Thank you, Paul, for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
And good luck with your Ducklings, and thank you for representing your dad, Anthony.
Thank you.
And Ben, thank you so much for giving us an insight into Leonard Nimoy and your days in the West End. Thank you for being here today. I hope you enjoyed our show. See you at the next West End video newsletter.
Covered now with lines and creases, tickets torn in hand, memories